Welcome back to the deep dive. So for this session, we had a pretty unique task with the sources you sent over.
Right.
We took this collection of scriptural texts, prophecies, historical accounts, letters, and did what we call an intra-biblical analysis, meaning we only looked at the texts themselves. The goal was to see if there was like a single coherent theme tying them all together. Not something we imposed, but something from the texts.
Yeah, it was a fascinating challenge, like being handed, I don't know, a box of jigsaw pieces from different puzzles and asked, does this actually make one big picture? And crucially, no looking at the box lids. The answer had to come purely from how the pieces fit together.
Exactly. And you know what? Something pretty powerful did emerge, a really cohesive framework.
It was quite surprising, actually.
The unifying theme we landed on is, well, we're calling it the divine summons. This idea of a sovereign call from YHWH, that's the divine name, used orchestrating history through basically two huge movements.
Right, two acts in a grand play almost.
Yeah. First, the scattering of people in judgment, and second, the later gathering of people in redemption.
It really does seem to be the engine driving the whole narrative
Yeah.
presented in these texts. But, okay, if God is summoning people together, why the scattering first? Why do they need to be pushed apart?
That's Act 1, right, the scattering. And our analysis showed it's rooted really fundamentally in the idea of universal sin. But, is that just rhetoric? Universal sin. Does the text really show this as the core reason for, all historical scattering?
We're based purely on these texts. Absolutely. It's surprisingly unambiguous. You have a line like in 1 Kings saying, flat out, there is no one that does not sin.
Okay.
So if that's taken as the baseline human condition in these writings, then sin naturally becomes this force of disintegration. It just tears things apart. And you see it playing out on different levels in the sources.
Like how?
Well, spiritually, you've got warnings about false teachers. Their zeal, it says in Galatians, is used to actively alienate you, to cut people off from the community, severing bonds.
Ah, okay, a spiritual scattering.
Exactly. Then there's the physical. Internal conflict, strife. One text uses this allegory of generations that began to bite one another, and that leads to, the divergence of peoples, groups splitting off.
So it's not just bad luck or politics. It's presented as an inevitable outcome of this moral condition.
Precisely. Jeremiah puts it starkly. It calls scattering the historical recompense, the payback, for generations of wrongdoing. Exile, being dispersed. That's shown as the climax when this universal sinfulness just runs its course.
Okay, so that's the scattering, the problem. How do the texts talk about the solution? Because you can't really gather people back together for good if the underlying issue, the sin, isn't dealt with, right?
That's the core of Act 2,
Yeah.
the gathering. And the texts are clear that a lasting gathering needs a fix for the sin problem.
And that fixes?
It's the promise of the new covenant. That's presented as the absolute basis for any real, lasting gathering. It's essentially a judicial pardon. Hebrews quotes it. Sins and wickedness I will remember no more.
A clean slate, basically.
Exactly. That divine declaration, that forgetting of sin, is positioned as the foundation allowing restoration.
And do the texts specify how that pardon is achieved? What makes it possible?
They do.
Yeah.
Hebrews chapter 2, for instance, talks about the Messiah figure Joshua, or Jesus in Greek, being temporarily made lower than the angels. Why? To taste death for every human being.
So a substitutionary act.
Yes. That act, described as a ransom, is framed as the pivotal event, the thing that makes the gathering, the bringing back of these scattered groups, even possible.
Wow. Okay, now here's something that really tied it all together for us in this deep dive. There was this one really potent metaphor we found cropping up in the prophetic texts.
Ah, you mean the whistle?
Yes. The Hebrew verb sharak, it translates as whistle or sometimes hiss. And this single sound, this divine whistle, is used to kick off both judgment and grace, scattering and gathering.
The contrast is really striking when you put the passages side by side.
Absolutely.
Well, first you have the whistle for scattering, judgment, like in Isaiah. There, YHWH will whistle to them from the ends of the earth. Who's them? Foreign nations, summoned like armies, swift and destructive, to execute judgment. It's a military call. A terrifying sound, really.
A summons for destruction.
Right. But then you get to Zechariah, and the same verb, sharak, the same divine whistle.
But it's different.
Completely different feel. It's intimate, like a shepherd calling his flock. The text says, I will whistle for them and gather them. because I have ransomed them.
Ah, because the ransom has been paid.
Exactly. So this whistle isn't for destruction anymore. It's a call for restoration, for life. And it's explicitly tied to that redemption we just talked about.
So the same sovereign power, the same voice, uses the same kind of call, but one brings armies for judgment, the other brings scattered people home for salvation.
It powerfully shows judgment and salvation not as like contradictory forces, but as two sides of the same coin. Two expressions of one single sovereign will working itself out in history, according to these texts.
That's the ultimate takeaway then. The divine summons reveals this unified narrative arc across all these different writings. Judgment and salvation, scattering and gathering, all orchestrated by one sovereign call.
Yeah, that's the picture that emerges solely from the text provided. A single, coherent, if complex story.
You know, it really makes you reflect on our own perspective, doesn't it? The texts themselves highlight this huge gap between divine scope and human understanding. There's that bit in Job, right, about not even knowing the timing of a wild goat giving birth.
Right, things completely hidden from us.
So if we can't grasp something like that, what does this whole deep dive into the divine summons, this immense historical drama of scattering and gathering orchestrated by a divine whistle, what does that imply about our ability, to predict or maybe even control the big cycles of history? Rise and fall, empires coming and going, scattering and gathering.
It certainly puts our own agency and understanding into perspective.
Definitely something to chew on. Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Join us next time.